Hello, and welcome to another MikroWin tutorial. In this video, we'll guide you through the process of connecting a SQL Server to MikroWin 2020. Establishing this connection allows you to securely store your measurement data and protocols in a database while giving you complete control over your data. With this setup, you can define user permissions, ensuring that only authorized users can create, copy, or delete data. Let's get started. Before we begin, ensure you have the following requirements in place. You should have a properly installed MS SQL Server, whether it's the Express, Standard, or Enterprise Edition. Additionally, make sure that SQL Server Management Studio is installed for database management. Both can be downloaded from Microsoft website. MikroWin 2020 should also be installed on your system. Lastly, you need sufficient administrative privileges to configure SQL Server settings. There are numerous videos available that provide step-by-step guides for installing both MS SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio. Let's first switch to the PC on which the SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio are installed. As we want to connect to the SQL Server from different workstations, we need to use the SQL Server authentication mode. By default, the server is set to Windows Authentication mode. To switch the SQL Server from Windows Authentication to SQL Server Authentication, we need to perform the following steps. First, we open SQL Server Management Studio and connect to the SQL Server instance using Windows Authentication. In Object Explorer, we right-click on the server name, the top element, and select Properties. In the Server Properties dialog, we navigate to the Security page. Under Server Authentication, we select SQL Server and Windows Authentication mode and click OK to apply the changes. For the changes to take effect, we need to restart the SQL Server service by right-clicking on the server name again and selecting the Restart option. Next, we need to create a new SQL Server Authenticated login. A right-click on the Security Logins item, open a context menu. From here, we choose option New Login. Within the upcoming dialog, we choose SQL Server Authentication and enter a username and password. We decide on MWinUser as the username and choose a secure password. You may uncheck Enforce Password Policy if needed. Under Server Roles, we assign the necessary roles, such as sysadmin. A click on OK creates the user. Finally, we test the authentication mode by disconnecting from the SQL Server and reconnecting using SQL Server Authentication. Here we use the newly created login credentials and verify that we can successfully connect. Our SQL Server is now configured to allow SQL Server Authentication. With the following step, we will create a new database so that MikroWin 2020 can store its data to the SQL Server. A right-click on the database item, open a context menu. From here, we choose option New Database. In the following dialog, we select a suitable name for the new database. Let us choose the name WinDB. A click on OK creates the new database. Now, we need to prepare the SQL Server for connection over the network. Therefore, we need to enable TCP/IP for network connections in SQL Server. This can be achieved using the SQL Server Configuration Manager. To open this manager, we do right-click the Windows Start button and choose Computer Management from the context menu. In the left pane, we expand Services and Applications and select SQL Server Configuration Manager. From here, we choose SQL Server Network Configuration and select Protocols for our SQL Server instance. In the right pane, we locate TCP/IP, right-click it, and select Properties. In the Protocol tab of the TCP/IP Properties dialog, we set the Enable option to Yes. Finally, we need to specify the port used for the connection to our SQL Server. To do so, we select the tab IP Addresses, scroll down to IP All, and set the value of TCP port to 1433. This is the default port for SQL Server communication. With a click on the OK button, we save the changes. For the changes to take effect, we need to restart the SQL Server service. To do so, we select the item SQL Server Services within the SQL Server Configuration Manager category. In the right pane, we locate our SQL Server. A right-click on this entry opens the context menu. Here we choose Restart to restart the service. Next, we need to tell the Windows firewall to open port 1433 so that requests to the SQL Server are not blocked by the firewall. To open a port in the Windows firewall, we open the Start menu, select Run, enter the command wf.msc, and press the OK button. In the left pane of this application, we right-click Inbound Rules, and then select New Rule from the context menu. In the new dialog box, we select the port option in the rule type window and select Next. In the Protocol and Ports window, we select the TCP option. Here we select specific local ports and enter the port number our SQL Server uses, so 1433. We click on Next. In the Action window, we select the Allow the Connection option and click Next again. In the Profile window, we select all profiles and then click on Next button. In the last window name, we enter a name, e.g. SQL Server Rule, for our new rule, and then select Finish. Last but not least, we need to determine the IP address of our new SQL Server. To do this, we click on the Windows Start button, enter the command cmd in the search field, and press Enter. A command window opens, in which we enter the command ipconfig and press Enter. A list with address data appears. The IP address of our server is the IPv4 address that is most similar to our network IP address. We will need the IPv4 address and the port later to access our SQL Server from MikroWin 2020. We have now made all the necessary preparations on the SQL Server PC. Let's now switch to our MikroWin workstation and carry out the necessary steps to enable access to the SQL Server. In MikroWin, we select the Settings menu item in the top right-hand corner and navigate to the Options tab. Here we switch the SQL Server Settings option to Microsoft SQL Server and click on the Access Settings button to enter all the data required to access our SQL Server. First, we need to enter a connection string. A connection string is a list of key/value pairs that is used to connect to a data source, authenticate, and find the data source based on the information provided. Our connection string looks like this. It contains the IP address, port, and the name of the database that we have already created with the SQL Server Management Studio. The text phrases username and password serve as placeholders and are replaced by the software with the content entered in the corresponding input fields of this dialog. We therefore only need to adjust the IP address, the port number, and the name of the database. All other parts of the connection string can be left unchanged. Finally, we enter the username and password for the login to our SQL Server and confirm the entries with OK. The only step left is to change the MikroWin folders used for measurement data and our protocols so that all this data is stored in our new SQL database. To do this, we navigate to the Folders area and click on the Reset button to open the corresponding context menu. We select the option \appfs\measurement to save our measurement data on the SQL Server. Here \appfs stand for Application File System and represents the root path of the SQL Server. We adapt the folder for protocols in the same way. There is an option to copy data between the Windows file system and the application file system. We will copy 2 example protocols for demonstration purposes. We open a File Explorer via the Explore button. The Import Files option allows us to select and transfer protocols. We select the ELISA and CurveFit protocols here. These have now been transferred to the SQL Server and can be used for measurements. The advantage of the application file system over the Windows file system is the possibility of restricting access to the measurement data and log files depending on the user rights. Furthermore, it is no longer possible to delete files outside MikroWin. So much for our tutorial on connecting a SQL Server to MikroWin. Thank you for listening and good luck with your work with MikroWin.